Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, which are just beautiful. They are 1-hour phone sessions where I call in the angels and we have a conversation with you and help you deepen in your connection with your divine guidance. They're wonderful, and if you're ever interested in scheduling one with me, you can do so through my website, illuminatingsouls.com, where you also can learn more about soul mentoring and the classes I offer. I also have a daily inspiration email blast, which you can sign up for, and you'll receive an inspiring message from me every weekday. So lots of ways that we can connect outside of this podcast. But for now, I'm here to help you rest and hopefully fall asleep. So I invite you to take a few deep breaths in and out, just allowing your body and your consciousness to receive the message that it's okay to rest. I love bedtime. I don't know how I felt about it as a kid, but as an adult, I look forward to that time of day when I can declare a day complete and I have this opportunity to go into this reset that all of us get to experience. That reset when our consciousness drifts away and our body relaxes. And then we get to awaken in the morning to a new day filled with opportunity and mystery. What a profound experience this life is. So, just breathe for a little bit with me. We're going to be together for about an hour. I'll be calling in the angels and then reading you a story. So there's no hurry to fall asleep. Just listen to my voice and drift off. My recommendation is that you keep the volume down low. What I find with sleep podcasts is if the volume is too loud, my consciousness thinks it has to listen. This must be important. Versus if I turn the volume down just a little bit above a murmur, so I can hear it, but I kind of have to reach to hear it. It sounds a little bit like one of those secondary conversations that you don't really have to listen to, but it helps distract you. So when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I listen to a variety of them, and I usually turn the volume down low, and that helps with the drifting. I call it the drifting. You know, that moment right before your consciousness kind of lets go of the waking world. I'm so intrigued by that concept of sleep. And I also know how challenging it can feel when it feels like it's elusive. So I'm here to keep you company. Whatever your sleep experience is, we all have our own sleep rhythm and our own experience of sleep. And whatever yours is, the angels and I are here to bring you love. So I'm guided to talk a little bit about this experience of love. Love is a word that can encompass so many varied experiences. And one of the turning points in my life was when I opened to what divine love felt like. It's expansive and it is all-encompassing, all-inclusive. There are no barriers or boundaries to it in the best way possible. As I was getting ready to record this episode, I was contemplating a metaphor I could share with you to help describe it. And the one that came forward was sort of imagine you're in a basement. And the basement could be well lit, right? Maybe there's lamps or LED lights or something. So the basement is illuminated by artificial light. And then you emerge from the basement into a bright sunny day. And the sun is present. And it's coming through the leaves and it's a brilliant blue sky. And you feel the warmth on you. And this is a warmth and a light that is far beyond the artificial light that you are experiencing in the basement. The artificial light in the basement is wonderful. Listen, I am thrilled to live in a time of electricity and light bulbs and no matter what time of day or night, I can turn on a lamp. So artificial light is awesome. I love it. I'm grateful for it. And there is a different timbre, a different tonal quality to the bright sunlight. And that's one of the best ways I can describe the difference between the love that so many of us experience on the earth plane and divine love. Human love, the love that we experience through our hearts is a miracle. It is wonderful. It is expansive and it creates miracles. To live a well-loved life is one of the greatest blessings any of us can receive. So in no way am I diminishing the value or the quality of the love that comes through the human heart or through the love of our animals. There are so many different ways love shows up in this world. And they are wonderful and they fuel us and they inspire us. They make life worth living. Divine love is all that and more. It is without boundaries. It is all-encompassing. If you were in a dark room and you held a light or a candle in front of your face, the light would only go so far, right? It could only illuminate so much. But if you go outside on a bright sunny day, the light, the sun is everywhere. And so over the years, I have had so many experiences of this wellspring of divine love that this is why I have devoted my life in helping to amplify it for people like you. So when I say the angels love you, God loves you, or there is love here for you, I am not talking about the kind of love that has polarities. we love to contemplate unconditional love, which I think we all have experienced to one extent or another. But it can't really be unconditional if there are times when it doesn't exist. That would mean that there are conditions upon love. Divine love, though, always is. It always is. And that can be hard to comprehend. And I don't want to make it sound like I walk around the earth embodying love of that quality. Anyone who knows me knows that I am mercurial and I get crabby just like everybody else, and I get frustrated with people in traffic. And as my guides love to joke, they say, we hate to break it to you, but you did not incarnate to be an avatar in this lifetime. I'm an earth girl. But in my work with the angels and with God, I can access that quality of love. Sometimes, many times, I can teach others about the quality of love that exists for us. Because when we open to it, healing happens. We don't have to know what is up for healing. We don't ever have to know, because God knows. The light knows. So take a deep breath in and release. So one of the reasons I was guided to open to this connection with angels is because angels are the embodiment of this quality of love. They love us through time and space. They love our very beingness, no matter what. Just like the sun shines without prejudice. The sun shines. It shines on all. It's not selective. It's its nature to shine. And this whole realm of earth is built around the light of the sun. So how would divine love be any different? There is a quality, a tonal quality to it that helps us come alive, that brings out the best in life and comforts us when we are navigating our deepest challenges. It is always here. And you don't have to know how to access it other than to welcome it in. So I'm going to call in the angels who are already here to help amplify this wellspring of divine love for you. And beautiful angels on high, I already feel your presence here. Thank you for all of the moments that led to this one, so that we can gather together with our beloveds in this moment to shine love upon them. Angels, I ask that you amplify the quality of your love so that each of the beloveds listening right now can open and feel the comfort, the empathy, the deep understanding and appreciation that you have for our beautiful ones gathered here. Help to lift our burdens and clear our energy fields so that we are more deeply connected with the heart of God. So so that we can refuel our batteries from source energy, so that as our bodies rest, our spirit is recharged, that we connect with divine inspiration, a lightness of spirit, that we are energized for brighter tomorrows, that we fully understand and are grateful for just how profoundly capable we are of bringing even more light into our lives and into the greater world. And angels, I ask that you help each of the beloveds here get a good expanse of rest, replenishment, and healing. So, dear ones, just take some more breaths in and get cozy and comfortable. And if you are open to it, while you rest, the angels will help you connect with divine love. It helps if you can imagine the most loving presence in the world coming to you now to comfort you. And often in this work, I use the imagination as a gateway, because if you can imagine a Venn diagram, two circles that have a little bit of overlap, the imagination center and the center of divine guidance, there is a bit of overlap between them. And so, if you can imagine the most loving presence in the universe bringing love to you, it often will help to open your connection with divine love. So think of the imagination being used as a gateway or a springboard to help you open to this love. And just allow your body and consciousness to receive it. To allow the light to come to you, to soothe and comfort you. And you just breathe and rest. And while you do, I'm going to read you a story, because don't we all just love a good bedtime story? And tonight, we're going to return to A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And we're returning to it because we just got to the really good part. This is one of my favorite parts of the book. It's so enchanting. And I really wanted to just share this energy with you. If you haven't listened to the other episodes, that's okay. You don't have to, but I'm going to give you a long rambling synopsis of where we are. Just so you know, I'm pretty awful at synopsizing, whatever that word would be, of bringing forth a synopsis of a book, because I ramble a lot, which is actually awesome for a sleep podcast, because hopefully you're asleep by now. And if you're not, that's okay. I will be just, I'll walk the fine line of boring and interesting for you. So here's where we are in the book. So little Sara Crewe, her father was Captain Crewe, and he and Sara were living in India. This was during the colonial period. And as was the custom, children often went away to boarding school in London. And so Captain Crewe takes Sara to Miss Minchin's seminary for boarding school. And Captain Crewe is handsome and wealthy, and he indulges Sara. He loves her so much, he calls her his little missus. Sara's mother had died, and so Sara is his world. And so Sara gets the best and the finest of everything. And with a child with a different demeanor, they could become spoiled, but not our Sara. Sara is kind and generous. And she also has a very active imagination. She tells stories and she imagines, and I think that's one of the things that drew me so much to this book as a child, because I had an active imagination too. I daydreamed a lot. And Sara finds it easy to believe in the best in people. So, sadly, Captain Crew dies. He had invested his wealth in a gold mine with a friend of his, and he passed away believing that the gold mines were bust. And Miss Minchin finds out about this, that Sara is now a penniless orphan, wants to just kick her out, as would be apropos of the time, and realizes that would look badly. So she relegates Sara to the life of a servant and moves her up into the attic with Becky, the scullery maid. And Sara lives a very difficult life. You know, back then in the early 1900s in London, there weren't things like child labor laws, or life was different then. So Sara would be sent out on errands any time of the day or night in all kinds of weather. And she would try to make the best of it. She would make up stories in her head. There was a family that she became enchanted with that she called the Large Family. They had many children and they seemed very happy. And interestingly enough, the children in that family also were intrigued by Sara. They called her the little girl who's not a beggar, because even though she seemed to be living the life of a poor beggar child, she clearly was more refined. The house next door to Miss Minchin's had been vacant, and Sara used to wish that someone would move in there and she would be able to see them through the attic. And one day, there's activity. And it turns out that a gentleman from India moves in with his servant, Ram Das. And we come to learn that this gentleman was Captain Crew's friend. And he's very, very sick. They said he has a brain fever or something, which may have been encephalitis or something from back then. And he's heartsick because Captain Crew died thinking the gold mines were a bust, but they weren't. They actually struck gold. And he's now searching for Sara. He doesn't know where she is. His solicitor, who happens to be the papa of the Large Family, they've been looking all over for a child who fits Sara's description. They've been to Paris. They're going to Moscow, not realizing that Sara's next door. But in the meanwhile, Ram Das, who's a very kind man, discovers Sara, and he just thinks she's a little girl who is a servant next door. And he knows that she is very kind. And so he hatches this plan with his employer to refurbish Sara's attic room. It was very sparse and cold before, but they hatched this plan to bring blankets and a robe and make a fire in the fireplace and bring her food because she hasn't been eating because Miss Minchin is so mean. And this is the chapter where Sara has woken up to find that her room has been transformed while she slept. It's like a miracle. She calls it magic. And, I was a little girl who believed in magic, and I'm a grown woman who believes in magic still, but this is magic born of kindness, born of generosity, born of empathy. And this is an easy kind of magic to believe in. So this is where we're going to begin our story. This is chapter 16, The Visitor. Imagine, if you can, what the rest of the evening was like. How they crouched by the fire which blazed and leaped and made so much of itself in the little grate. How they removed the covers of the dishes and found rich, hot, savory soup, which was a meal in itself, and sandwiches and toast and muffins, enough for both of them. The mug from the washstand was used as Becky's teacup, and the tea was so delicious that it was not necessary to pretend that it was anything but tea. They were warm and full-fed and happy. And it was just like Sara that, having found her strange good fortune real, she should give herself up to the enjoyment of it to the utmost. She had lived such a life of imaginings that she was quite equal to accepting any wonderful thing that happened, and almost to cease in a short time, to find it bewildering. "I don't know anyone in the world who could have done it," she said, "but there has been someone. And here we are sitting by their fire, and it's true. And whoever it is, wherever they are, I have a friend, Becky. Someone is my friend." It cannot be denied that as they sat before the blazing fire and ate nourishing, comfortable food, they felt a kind of rapturous awe, and looked into each other's eyes with something like doubt. "Do you think," Becky faltered once in a whisper, "do you think it could melt away, miss? Hadn't we better be quick?" And she hastily crammed her sandwich into her mouth. If it was only a dream, kitchen manners would be overlooked. "No, it won't melt away," said Sara. "I am eating this muffin, and I can taste it. You never really eat things in dreams. You only think you are going to eat them. Besides, I keep giving myself pinches, and I touched a hot piece of coal just now on purpose." The sleepy comfort which at length almost overpowered them was a heavenly thing. It was the drowsiness of a happy, well-fed childhood, and they sat in the fire glow and luxuriated in it until Sara found herself turning to look at her transformed bed. There were even blankets enough to share with Becky. The narrow couch in the next attic was more comfortable that night than its occupant had ever dreamed that it could be. As she went out of the room, Becky turned upon the threshold and looked about her with devouring eyes. "If it ain't here in the morning, miss," she said, "it's been here tonight, and I shall never forget it." She looked at each particular thing as if to commit it to memory. The fire was there, pointing with her finger, and the table before it, and the lamp was there, and the light looked rosy red, and there was a satin cover on your bed, and a warm rug on the floor, and everything looked beautiful. And she paused a second and laid her hand on her stomach tenderly. There was soup and sandwiches and muffins. There was. And with this conviction, a reality at least, she went away. Through the mysterious agency which works in schools and among servants, it was quite well known in the morning that Sara Crewe was in horrible disgrace, and Ermengarde was under punishment, and that Becky would have been packed out of the house before breakfast, but that a scullery maid could not be dispensed with at once. And I forgot to include this part in my rambling summary, but before the magic happened, Sara, Ermengarde, and Becky were found in Sara's attic by Miss Minchin, who was horrified because Ermengarde is a student at the school and should not be socializing with Becky and Sara, and a huge scene erupted. So that's the buzz that's going around the school right now. The servants knew that she was allowed to stay because Miss Minchin could not easily find another creature helpless and humble enough to work like a bounden servant for so few shillings a week. The elder girls in the schoolroom knew that if Miss Minchin did not send Sara away, it was for a practical reason of her own. "She's growing so fast and learning such a lot somehow," said Jessie to Lavinia, "that she will be given classes soon. And Miss Minchin knows she will have to work for nothing. It was really nasty of you, Lavvy, to tell her about having fun in the garret. How did you find out?" "I got it out of Lottie. She's such a baby. She didn't know she was telling me. There was nothing nasty at all in speaking to Miss Minchin. I felt it my duty," priggishly. "She was being deceitful, and it's ridiculous that she should look so grand and be made so much of in her rags and tatters." "What were they doing when Miss Minchin caught them?" "Pretending some silly thing. Ermengarde had taken up her hamper to share with Sara and Becky. She never invites us to share things, not that I care. But it's rather vulgar of her to share with servant girls and attics. I wonder Miss Minchin didn't turn Sara out, even if she does want her for a teacher." "If she was turned out, where would she go?" inquired Jessie, a trifle anxiously. "How do I know?" snapped Lavinia. "She'll look rather queer when she comes into the schoolroom this morning. I should think, after what's happened. She had no dinner yesterday, and she's not to have any today." Jessie was not as ill-natured as she was silly. She picked up her book with a little jerk. "Well, I think it's horrid," she said. "They've no right to starve her to death." When Sara went into the kitchen that morning, the cook looked askance at her, and so did the housemaids. But she passed them hurriedly. She had, in fact, overslept herself a little, and Becky had done the same. Neither had had time to see each other, and each had come downstairs in haste. Sara went into the scullery. Becky was violently scrubbing a kettle, and was actually gurgling a little song in her throat. She looked up with a wildly elated face. "It was there when I wakened, miss, the blanket," she whispered excitedly. "It was as real as it was last night." "So was mine," said Sara. "It's all there now, all of it. While I was dressing, I ate some of the cold things we left." Oh, Lord," Becky uttered the exclamation in sort of a rapturous groan, and ducked her head over her kettle just in time as the cook came in from the kitchen. Miss Minchin had expected to see in Sara when she appeared in the schoolroom very much what Lavinia had expected to see. Sara had always been an annoying puzzle to her, because severity never made her cry or looked frightened. When she was scolded, she stood still and listened politely with a grave face. When she was punished, she performed her tasks, or went without her meals, making no complaint or outward sign of rebellion. The very fact that she never made an impudent answer seemed to Miss Minchin a kind of impudence in itself. But after yesterday's deprivation of meals, the violent scene of last night, The prospect of hunger today, she must surely have broken down. It would be strange indeed if she did not come downstairs with pale cheeks and red eyes and an unhappy, humbled face. Miss Minchin saw her for the first time when she entered the schoolroom to hear the little French class recite its lessons and superintend its exercises. And she came in with a springing step, color in her cheeks, and a smile hovering about the corners of her mouth. It was the most astonishing thing Miss Minchin had ever known. It gave her quite a shock. What was this child made of? What could such a thing mean? She called her at once to her desk. "You do not look as if you realize that you are in disgrace," she said. "Are you absolutely hardened? The truth is that when one is still a child, or even if one is grown up, and has been well fed, and has slept long and softly and warm, when one has gone to sleep in the midst of a fairy story and has wakened to find it real, one cannot be unhappy or even look as if one were. And if one could not, if one tried, keep a glow out of joy out of one's eyes." Miss Minchin was almost struck dumb by the look of Sara's eyes when she made her perfectly respectful answer. "I beg your pardon, Miss Minchin," she said. "I know that I am in disgrace. Be good enough not to forget it and look as if you had come into a fortune. It is an impertinence. And remember, you are to have no food today." "Yes, Miss Minchin," Sara answered. But as she turned away, her heart leapt with the memory of what yesterday had been. If the magic had not saved me just in time, she thought, how horrible it would have been. "Well, she can't be very hungry," whispered Lavinia. "Just look at her. Perhaps she is pretending that she had a good breakfast," with a spiteful laugh. "She's different from other people," said Jessie, watching Sara with her class. "Sometimes I'm a bit frightened of her." "Ridiculous thing," said Lavinia. All through the day, the light was in Sara's face, and the color in her cheek. The servants cast puzzled glances at her and whispered to each other, and Miss Amelia's small blue eyes wore an expression of bewilderment. What such an audacious look of well-being under august displeasure would mean, she could not understand. It was, however, just like Sara's singular, obstinate way. She was probably determined to brave the matter out. One thing Sara had resolved upon as she thought things over. The wonders which had happened must be kept a secret if such things were possible. If Miss Minchin should choose to mount the attic again, of course all would be discovered, but it did not seem likely that she would do so for some time at least, unless she was led by suspicion. Ermengarde and Lottie would be watched with such strictness that they would not dare to steal out of their beds again. Ermengarde could be told the story and trusted to keep it a secret. If Lottie made any discoveries, she could be bound to secrecy also. Perhaps the magic itself would help to hide its own marvels. But whatever happens, Sara kept saying to herself all day, whatever happens, somewhere in the world there's a heavenly kind person who is my friend, my friend. If I never know who it is, if I never can even thank him, I shall never feel quite so lonely. If it was possible for weather to be worse than it had been the day before, it was worse this day. Wetter, muddier, colder. There were more errands to be done. The cook was more irritable, and knowing that Sara was in disgrace, she was more savage. But what does anything matter when one's magic has just proved itself one's friend? Sara's supper of the night before had given her strength. She knew that she should sleep well and warmly, and even though she had naturally begun to be hungry again before evening, she felt that she could bear it until breakfast time on the following day, when her meals would surely be given to her again. It was quite late when she was at last allowed to go upstairs. She had been told to go into the schoolroom and study until 10 o'clock, and she had become interested in her work and remained over her books later. When she reached the top flight of stairs and stood before the attic door, it must be confessed that her heart beat rather fast. Of course, it might have all been taken away, she whispered, trying to be brave. It might only have been lent to me for just that one awful night, but it was lent to me. It had. It was real. She pushed the door open and went in. Once inside, she gasped slightly, shut the door, and stood with her back against it, looking from side to side. The magic had been there again. It actually had, and it had done even more than before. The fire was blazing, and lovely leaping flames more merrily than ever. A number of new things had been brought into the attic, which so altered the look of it that she had not been past doubting she would have rubbed her eyes. Upon the low table another supper stood, this time with cups and plates for Becky as well as herself. A piece of bright, heavy, strange embroidery covered the battered mantel, and on it some ornaments had been placed. All the bare, ugly things which could be covered with draperies had been concealed and made to look quite pretty. Some odd materials of rich colors had been fastened against the wall with fine, sharp tacks, so sharp that they could be pressed into the wood and plaster without hammering. Some brilliant fans were pinned up, and there were several large cushions, big and substantial enough to use as seats. A wooden box was covered with a rug, and some cushions lay on it so that it wore quite the air of a sofa. Sara slowly moved away from the door and simply sat down and looked again. "It is exactly like something fairy come true," she said. "And there isn't the least difference. I feel as if I might wish for anything, diamonds or bags of gold, and they would appear. That wouldn't be any stranger than this. Is this my garret? Am I the same cold, ragged, damp Sara? And to think I used to pretend and wish there were fairies. The one thing I always wanted was to see a fairy story come true. I'm living in a fairy story. I feel as if I might be a fairy myself and able to turn things into anything else." She rose and knocked upon the wall for Becky to come over. When she entered, she almost dropped in a heap upon the floor. For a few seconds, she quite lost her breath. "Oh, Lord," she gasped. "Oh, Lord, miss." "You see," said Sara. And this night Becky sat on a cushion upon the hearth rug and had a cup and saucer of her own. When Sara went to bed, she found that she had a new thick mattress and big downy pillows. Her old mattress and pillow had been removed to Becky's bed instead. Consequently, with these additions, Becky had been supplied with unheard of comfort. "Where does it all come from?" Becky broke forth once. "Lord, who does it, miss?" "Don't let us even ask," said Sara. "If it were not what I want to say, oh, thank you, I would rather not know. It makes it more beautiful." From that time, life became more wonderful day by day. The fairy story continued. Almost every day something new was done. Some new comfort or ornament appeared each time Sara opened the door at night, until in a short time the attic was a beautiful little room full of all sorts of odd and luxurious things. The ugly walls were gradually entirely covered with pictures and draperies. Ingenious pieces of folding furniture appeared. A bookshelf was hung up and filled with books. New comforts and conveniences appeared one by one, until there seemed nothing left to be desired. When Sara went downstairs in the morning, the remains of the supper were on the table, and when she returned to the attic in the evening, the magician had removed them and left another little meal. Miss Minchin was as harsh and insulting as ever, Miss Amelia as peevish, and the servants were as vulgar and rude. Sara was sent on errands in all weathers and scolded and driven hither and thither. She was scarcely allowed to speak to Ermengarde and Lottie. Lavinia sneered at the increasing shabbiness of her clothes, and the other girls stared curiously at her when she appeared in the schoolroom. But what did it all matter when she was living in this wonderful, mysterious story? It was more romantic and delightful than anything she had ever invented to comfort her starved young soul and save herself from despair. Sometimes when she was scolded, she could scarcely keep from smiling. If you only knew, she was saying to herself, if you only knew. The comfort and happiness she enjoyed were making her stronger, and she had them always to look forward to. As she came home from her errands, wet and tired and hungry, she knew she would soon be warm and well fed after she had climbed the stairs. During the hardest day, she could occupy herself blissfully by thinking about what she should see when she opened the attic door and wondering what the new delight had been prepared for her. In a very short time, she began to look less thin. Color came into her cheeks, and her eyes did not seem too big for her face. "Sara Crewe looks wonderfully well," Miss Minchin remarked disapprovingly to her sister. "Yes," answered poor silly Miss Amelia. "She is absolutely fattening. She was beginning to look like a little starved crow." "Starved!" exclaimed Miss Minchin angrily. "There was no reason why she should look starved. She always had plenty to eat." "Oh, of course," agreed Miss Amelia humbly, alarmed to find that she had, as usual, said the wrong thing. "There is something very disagreeable in seeing that sort of thing in a child her age," said Miss Minchin with haughty vagueness. "What sort of thing?" Miss Amelia ventured. "It might almost be called defiance," answered Miss Minchin, feeling annoyed because she knew the thing resented was nothing like defiance, and she did not know what other unpleasant term to use. The spirit and will of any other child would have been entirely humbled and broken by the changes she has had to submit to, but upon my word, she seems as little subdued as if she were a princess. "Do you remember," put in the unwise Miss Amelia, "what she said to you that day in the classroom about what would you do if you found out that she was—" "No, I don't," said Miss Minchin. "Don't talk nonsense." But she remembered indeed. Very naturally, even Becky was beginning to look plumper and less frightened. She could not help it. She had her share in the secret fairy story, too. She had 2 mattresses, 2 pillows, plenty of bed covering, and every night a hot supper and a seat on the cushions by the fire. The Bastille had melted away. The prisoners no longer existed. 2 comforted children sat in the midst of delights. Sometimes Sara read aloud from her books. Sometimes she studied her own lessons. Sometimes she sat and looked into the fire and tried to imagine who her friend could be, and wished she could say to him some of the things in her heart. Then it came about that another wonderful thing happened. A man came to the door and left several parcels. All were addressed in large letters, "To the little girl in the right-hand attic." Sara herself was sent to open the door and take them in. She laid the 2 largest parcels on the hall table and was looking at the address when Miss Minchin came down the stairs and saw her. "Take the things to the young lady to whom they belong," she said severely. "Don't stand there staring at them." "They belong to me," answered Sara quietly. "To you?" exclaimed Miss Minchin. "What do you mean?" "I don't know where they come from," said Sara, "but they are addressed to me. I sleep in the right-hand attic. Becky has the other one." Miss Minchin came to her side and looked at the parcels with an excited expression. "What is in them?" she demanded. "I don't know," replied Sara. "Open them," she ordered. Sara did as she was told. When the packages were unfolded, Miss Minchin's countenance wore suddenly a singular expression. What she saw was pretty and comforting clothing of different kinds, shoes, stockings, and gloves, and a warm and beautiful coat. There were even a nice hat and an umbrella. They were all good and expensive things, and on the pocket of the coat was pinned a paper on which were written these words: "To be worn every day, will be replaced by others when necessary." Miss Minchin was quite agitated. This was an incident which suggested strange things to her sordid mind. Could it be that she had made a mistake after all, and that the neglected child had some powerful though eccentric friend in the background? Perhaps some previously unknown relation who had suddenly traced her whereabouts and chose to provide for her in this mysterious and fantastic way. Relations were sometimes very odd, particularly rich old bachelor uncles who did not care for having children near them. A man of that sort might prefer to overlook his young relation's welfare at a distance. Such a person, however, would be sure to be crotchety and hot-tempered enough to be easily offended. It would not be very pleasant if there were such a one, and he should learn all the truth about the thin, shabby clothes, the scant food, and the hard work. She felt very queer indeed, and very uncertain, and she gave a side glance at Sara. "Well," she said, in a voice such as she had never used since a little girl lost her father, "someone is very kind to you, and the things have been sent, and you are to have new ones when they are worn out. You may as well go and put them on and look respectable. After you are dressed, you may come downstairs and learn your lessons in the schoolroom. You need not go out on any more errands today." About a half an hour afterward, when the schoolroom door opened and Sara walked in, the entire seminary was struck dumb. "My word," said Jessie, jogging Lavinia's elbow. "Look at the Princess Sara." Everybody was looking, and when Lavinia looked, she turned quite red. It was the Princess Sara indeed. At least since the days when she had been a princess, Sara had never looked as she did now. She did not seem the Sara they had seen come down the back stairs a few hours ago. She was dressed in the kind of frock Lavinia had been used to envying her the possession of. It was deep and warm in color and beautifully made. Her slender feet looked as if they had done when Jessie had admired them, and the hair, whose heavy locks had made her look rather like a Shetland pony when it fell loose about her small, odd face, was tied back with a ribbon. "Perhaps someone has left her a fortune," Jessie whispered. "I always thought something would happen to her. She's so queer. Don't please her by staring at her in that way, you silly thing." "Sara," broke in Miss Minchin's deep voice, "come and sit here." And while the whole schoolroom stared and pushed with elbows and scarcely made any effort to conceal its exciting curiosity, Sara went to her old seat of honor and bent her head over her books. That night when she went into her room after she and Becky had eaten their supper, she sat and looked at the fire seriously for a long time. "Are you making something up in your head, miss?" Becky inquired with respectful softness. When Sara sat in silence looking into the coals with dreaming eyes, it generally meant that she was making a new story. But this time she was not, and she shook her head. "No," she answered. "I am wondering what I ought to do." Becky stared, still respectfully. She was filled with something approaching reverence for everything Sara did and said. "I can't help thinking about my friend," Sara explained. "If he wants to keep himself a secret, it would be rude to try and find out who he is. But I do so want him to know how thankful I am to him and how happy he has made me. Anyone who is kind wants to know when people have been made happy. They care for that more than being thanked." So we're going to end here. I think that this is such a beautiful place to end. I'm just going to read this one more time. "I can't help thinking about my friend," Sara explained. "If he wants to keep himself a secret, it would be rude to try and find out who he is. But I do so want him to know how thankful I am to him and how happy he has made me." And this is the part that I just love. Anyone who is kind wants to know when people have been made happy. Isn't that true? Anyone who is kind wants to know when people have been made happy. That's such a great joy. So we'll come back, but I definitely wanted to be able to share this chapter with you. There's still more to the chapter, but we're going to end here. And here's to magic showing up, born out of kindness and compassion and joy. So you have a good rest. I love you and I am grateful for you. You are precious in this world. And we'll connect again soon. Be well. Thank you.